All right, so here we are back at talking states of consciousness, and again, we're in the idea that we alter our state of consciousness simply means that we're altering those choices that we make. We're altering what gets screened in and what gets screened out, and we're going to talk through the rest of this chapter about a number of different states of consciousness. Sleeping will be a long conversation that we have. And the idea that not only when we're asleep that we're in a different state of consciousness than when we're awake, but that in different stages of sleep there are differences in how much and what gets screened in or screened out. We mentioned before the idea that when we daydream, that's an altered state of consciousness. And then we're going to talk about psychoactive substances, which their effect is directly to alter our state of consciousness, to alter how likely it is that we will pay attention to things in our environment or pay attention to things in our internal state. And different substances either make it more likely that lots of things get screened in or less likely that lots of things get screened in. But we're going to start this conversation by talking about hypnosis. And hypnosis, sometimes people, will talk about whether they believe in hypnosis or not. It's not really much up for debate. It's a scientific fact that hypnosis exists. We used to have more debate about this before we could utilize brain imaging to demonstrate that hypnosis is happening. But essentially, when a person is hypnotized, we can watch changes to how likely it is for information to make it to their frontal lobe. And our frontal lobe is really where awareness happens. And so the hypnotherapist essentially changes what rules your cerebral cortex and your frontal lobe are using for what gets in or what doesn't get in. And we can watch that happening on an fMRI, for example. Not everyone is equally able to be hypnotized. The best measure of whether somebody's going to be able to get hypnotized easily is how good they are at daydreaming. So essentially, if you are somebody who is good at tuning out the world and getting lost in your own thoughts, if you do that easily and well, then probably you're a good candidate for hypnosis. And if you're somebody who is highly distractible and doesn't kind of lose yourself for long periods of time and daydream without getting pulled out of it by something else that grabs your attention, you may be a less good candidate for hypnosis. One of the main things that hypnosis is useful for is pain management. And there is a radio story, an NPR story that I'm going to have you watch directly after this that we'll talk about together in our live discussion. But it doesn't talk about hypnosis per se, but it does talk about pain as being highly reactive to dual processing. So with pain, we think of pain, you hurt your leg and you think about the pain being in your leg. But in fact, that's not where we experience pain. That we experience pain when the nerve signals from the injured leg reach our somatosensory cortex and then are forwarded on to our frontal lobe. And you remember those terms hopefully from the last chapter. And so if we can stop the pain signal information from reaching our frontal lobe, we remain unaware of the pain or relatively unaware of the pain. And so we use this for things like chronic pain management of arthritis or other conditions. There's even some research looking at using hypnosis to manage pain with some low-level surgeries. And so it really is about stopping those signals from reaching the frontal lobe. When you when you listen to that radio piece as soon as you end here, again, they're not talking about hypnosis there, but they are talking about the fact that if our attention is on something else, then we are less likely to be aware of pain, and that some experiences enhance pain and some making it worse, and some experiences lessen pain, and that some of those differences are about our emotional state. That essentially when we are in a negative emotional state, when we're afraid or anxious, then we experience pain with the volume turned up. If we're not anxious, if we're not distressed, then pain volume is turned down. And so again, that volume is about how likely and to what degree the pain signal gets to the frontal lobe. And think about that for a minute, how much more important pain might be as information if we're also afraid that if something bad is happening to us, the pain may be more important. But if we're feeling good otherwise and not upset, then it may be that our brain decides the pain can't be all that important to pay attention to. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the idea of hypnosis for weight control and smoking cessation, essentially self-control behaviors. And while there are a lot of people who offer hypnosis for these problems, there's a lot of debate about whether or not hypnosis is truly effective for those problems. And I think really it comes down again to attention, that pain is a completely internal process. And so if I can train your brain to not pay attention to pain signals, then that might be effective. But I can maybe have you not pay attention to your own internal craving for food or smoking, but then the world is filled with other cues for those things. And it really is not possible to keep all of that information out of your frontal lobe. And so you become aware of the fact that brownies are delicious because other people are talking about them and offering you them, and you're being advertised to, etc. And it's really hard, therefore, to ignore all of that information. The next set of lecture will focus on sleep, starting with circadian rhythm, and we will pick up there.